Just setting up. Just setting up for this live. Trying to get my angles right. Put my charger in. Okay, what are we doing today? Welcome to the live. Welcome to the live. Just trying to set up a little bit. Trying to see what's going to listen to today. Welcome to the live, guys. Welcome. Welcome.
Summer trips are around the corner. Start here and go anywhere with Hertz. You'll hit the road with fast pickups, easy returns, and a Gold Plus rewards program packed with perks. That weekend trip upstate, take it. That drive to connect with family and friends. Let's go. Choose from premium cars, SUVs, trucks, vans, and more. With over 11,000 Hertz locations worldwide. What are you waiting for? Book your next road trip at Hertz.com. These first two episodes of The Kids of Rutherford County are free. But to hear the whole series, you'll need to subscribe to the New York Times, where you'll get access to all serial production shows and all the New York Times podcasts. And it's super easy. You can sign up through Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And if you're already a Times subscriber, just link your account and you're done. It was a March afternoon in Rutherford County, Tennessee, a growing community about 30 miles southeast of Nashville. School was out for the day, and a dozen or so little kids were playing a game of pickup basketball in someone's backyard. And then, as kids do, one said something about another kid's mom. This insult led to some shoving. And then, as kids also do, one of them pulled out a cell phone and started filming. There's some kind of heavy neon filter over the whole video, so it's hard to make out any faces. But here's what you can see. An 8-year-old boy, hands shoved into the pockets of his oversized parka, is trying to walk away from everyone when a smaller boy, about 5 or 6, runs up behind him and smacks him in the back a few times. Then another little kid runs up and takes his turn. There was a couple feeble punches from the back as they were walking away. Some of the older boys are hanging him on.
Like the live for me, please.
You can hear one girl try to break it up.
Oh yeah, more people can come in.
Other kids just stand around
Really
watching.
appreciate it.
And a few of them are also filming on their phones. And then the video just ends. It's the type of fight that barely seems worth posting online. But that happened anyway. And soon the video started to make the rounds, spreading from the kids to teachers, and eventually
wouldn't be in no type of trouble. So I made plans to meet Mrs. Templeton.
Later that day, Alexia and her 10-year-old daughter, Imarie, drove to meet Officer Templeton on a side street.
So when I got there, Mrs. Templeton shows me the video, and I was like, well, that's not my kids, it's Bully. And she was like, well, you know, I want to talk to the other kids, and what they're doing is not right. No one is in trouble. I was like, well, okay. She said, so can you identify your kids? I said, yes, I can. I said, that's my daughter. Is the one who said stop to Tay Tay. That's my son over there. He's in the video, but he wasn't saying nothing, instigating nothing. She said, so who are the rest of the other kids? So my daughter, she wrote down all the kids' names, and we gave them to her.
The whole thing seemed very casual. Alexia doesn't remember Officer Templeton even telling her that she was conducting an investigation. So when Imarie, Alexia's daughter, leaned over the hood of the police car and wrote down the names of the kids in the video, she had no idea that what she was doing would lead to 11 kids, including herself, getting arrested. The reason why Officer Templeton was trying to ID all the kids in the video is because she believed all of them bore some responsibility for the fight, or at least for not stopping it. The two kids doing the actual hitting, she thought they were probably too young to bring charges against. They looked like they were about 5 or 6 years old, and in Rutherford County, they generally didn't charge kids under 7. But what about the other kids? The kids standing around, the kids egging it on? Officer Templeton wondered if there was a charge that would apply to all of them. So, relying on the memory of a 10-year-old, Officer Templeton took the list of names given to her by Imarie and headed to the county's judicial commissioner's office for guidance on what to charge them all with. In Rutherford County, judicial commissioners are the people who approve charges. At their office, the commissioners searched the state's database, and they found a statute that seemed to fit the bill: criminal responsibility for conduct of another. Officer Templeton would later say, quote, I looked at the charge to the best of my ability from my experience, was like, yeah, that's the charge. The judicial commissioners signed off. Petitions were secured. Word went out. Arrest these kids. As would later be documented in over a dozen interviews with internal affairs investigators, the arrests did not go smoothly.
Well, we'll go ahead and start with May 27th, 2016. It is 11 a.m. Sergeant Craig Snyder, Office of Professional Responsibility.
In an office at the local police department, Tammy Garrett, the principal at a school called Hopgood Elementary, sat down with 2 of those investigators.
When did you become aware of the arrests that were going to take place at Hopgood at your school?
The investigation or the arrest?
Well, the investigation.
Principal Garrett told the investigators that Officer Templeton had shown her the video of the fight on a Wednesday, and by Friday morning, Templeton called to say the police were coming to Hopgood to arrest some girls who were in the video. But right away, Principal Garrett was concerned, partly because the kids Templeton named, well, Garrett hadn't seen all of them in the video.
There were kids that I knew that I didn't see in there that are good kids at school that I started thinking, what's going on? I didn't see any of those kids.
Did she mention how she had identified those kids?
She had talked to some kids and the parents, is what she said. And so I thought, well, she's an investigator, not me. Maybe things I didn't know.
Still, Principal Garrett was worried. It was her 4th year as principal at Hopgood Elementary, and she'd spent those years working hard to build trust with parents and the kids at her school. She thought it certainly wouldn't help that relationship.
Thanks for
if
the
she was
likes.
allowing
Thanks
police
for the
to
likes. I really appreciate it.
But she believed she didn't have a choice in the matter. Principal Garrett said Officer Templeton assured her. the
Any
arrests
questions or
wouldn't be
anything, feel
disruptive.
free to ask me. Feel
She
free.
said, I want to promise y'all that they weren't
Going back and
beating
forth
us
between
up
the chat and
and that
painting, so bear with me.
They disagreed. Garrett told Templeton her preference was that the girls be arrested before school let out. She didn't want a bunch of students in the hallways or the yard or in the bus lines seeing their classmates get taken out by police officers. But as the day wore on, getting closer to school dismissal at 2:30, Officer Templeton still hadn't shown up at Hopgood. Instead, 3 different police officers came. And that's when things got confusing. Crowded into the assistant principal's office, discussing what to do next, Garrett said one officer in a tactical vest was telling her, "Go get the kids." But a second officer was telling her, "Don't go get the kids." That officer seemed to be having second thoughts about the whole thing.
So he kept telling me, hey, this is not right, I don't think this is right.
What, was he specific with anything?
So he said, this is going to blow up, this is going to blow up, you shouldn't do this is not right.
Meaning the arrest?
And I don't know what to do.
The officer telling Principal Garrett not to go get the kids was Chris Williams. In his internal affairs interview, Officer Williams said when he learned what these arrests were about, he was shocked.
It was like, what in the world?
He was like, what in the world? Because he'd seen the video of the fight the night before, after Officer Templeton had asked him to check it out. And he remembered when he watched it.
I was like, that's the egregious video that you was talking about? And she was like, yeah. And I'm like, but if you follow any group of kids that get off the bus home, this is what you're going to see. This is normal behavior from other kids.
Then there was this. All the kids in the video were black, and most of the students at Hopgood were black or Latino. Williams, who's also black, said he didn't think Templeton, who's white, was intentionally going after these kids because of their race. But he also said he couldn't help but wonder if something like this would happen at a school that was mostly white. Back in the assistant principal's office, Williams started calling up the chain of command, if not to stop the arrests, at least to slow things down while they got some clarity on the situation.
And I'm trying to call someone to, I don't want to say use common sense, but at least think about what we're doing.
The first person Williams talked to was a sergeant. They told him to go forward with the arrests. He then called others to try to get a different answer. He called a lieutenant who didn't pick up. Then he got through to a major, who essentially told him to just figure it out. Meanwhile, the officer in the room telling Garrett to yes, go get the kids, was Officer Jeff Carroll, and he was making his own phone calls. Carroll was a patrol officer and a SWAT team member. He declined my interview requests, but in his internal affairs interview, he said, well, quote, nobody likes to arrest kids at school. He had his orders.
I have what our sergeant tells me to do something. As long as I know it's not illegal, I have an order. I'm gonna do it.
Making some watercolor right now. Funny.
So, who finally said, go get the kids?
Carol.
What made you listen to Carol at that point? You said they were saying don't do.
Because he was probably the more aggressive one. So I went to get him.
Principal Garrett got 3 girls from their classrooms, an 11-year-old, a 10-year-old, and an 8-year-old.
As I came up, with the hall with the girls, I was kind of trying to prepare them. I said, hey guys, the police are here. Regarding the video, you're gonna have to come to the office with me. Well, the oldest one was telling me, hey, these other 2 weren't even there. From me seeing the video, I didn't see them in the video, so I thought maybe she had a pretty legitimate claim. I don't know if that's what
You said
I
this
heard.
was in the hallway?
Yeah, as we're walking up down the hall, she was like, Dr. G, they weren't even there, they weren't even there.
One of the girls even had an alibi. She'd been at a pizza party with her basketball team the day of the fight. As Garrett walked the girls into the office, she turned to the cops and said,
These 2 weren't even there, and then Officer Carroll got very aggressive with me, and he was like right here in my face, and he pulled out the cuss, and he said, we're going now, there's no more talking, we're going now. And I said, but, they said they weren't even there. And he said, the 3
They do confirm kids were crying, and emotions were running high. Principal Garrett then told the police that one of the little girls had diabetes and got treatment when she got home from school. Carol got on the phone with his sergeant, who told him that the girl could sit tight in the nurse's office for now, but the other two girls needed to be arrested. Officer Carroll then turned to those two girls.
I told him, honey, something's come up. We have to take y'all down to the juvenile detention center, but don't worry, your mom and dad's gonna be able to pick you up as soon as we get down there. Of course, they started crying. But
The juvenile detention center, jail basically, one of the largest in the state, a two-tiered jail with dozens of surveillance cameras, 48 cells, and 64 beds. And contrary to what Officer Carroll suggested to the girls, kids who get arrested don't always get picked up by their mom and dad as soon as they get there. Instead, according to the standard procedure, they can be booked, meaning jail staff record their names and birth dates, do a 16-point search, and then place them in a holding area. Inside the school office, Officer Carroll handcuffed the 11-year-old, and she dropped to her knees. A third officer handcuffed the 8-year-old, though once they got to the parking lot, he took the handcuffs off because he quote, didn't really think she was a risk or anything. Back in the office, Principal Garrett suddenly realized she forgot to get the last girl on Templeton's list.
You know, because when I came in with those other three and it went crazy with the yelling and stuff, I realized I never went and got the kid that was in the bus.
The kid on the bus was 10-year-old Imarie. Not only was she the one who wrote down the names for Officer Templeton just the day before, but she was also the one in the video saying, "Stop, stop, Tay-Tay." And yet Garrett was still being told to get her.
So I said, she's on the bus by now. They said, go get her. So I had already that time, the man already yelled at me. I was already crying. And they made me go out there crying in front of all my bus students and get her off the bus.
So I was on my way home. You know, I got out of school on the way home.
This is Imarie.
But Miss Garrett, she came to get me, and she had tears in her eyes. And when she whispered in my ear talking about the police, that's when I broke down, and that's when I shut everything out. I was scared. I didn't know what was going to happen. I was going to go to jail. It was just a lot, and I was just trying to figure out what's going on. Why is this happening? What am I getting picked up for?
So my sister called me and told me I needed to get to the school because they was trying to take my daughter to the detention. And I said, okay, I'm on my way.
This again is Alexia, Imarie's mom.
When I got there, it was some police officers there. They had my daughter. She was crying, upset, throwing up everywhere. And police officers told me that they had to take them down. They had to take her to the juvenile detention. I was like, you gotta take her to juvenile detention? They haven't done nothing. And then they was like, well, this is out of our hands. You know, you got kids crying and don't want to go to the detention, don't know what they're going to the detention, and you got to hand your kids over to some strangers.
In total, 11 kids from across the county were brought to the juvenile detention center over that video. One of them by mistake, so she was released immediately. But the other 10 kids were processed. When Imarie was taken to the detention center, jail staff recorded her name and birth date, searched her, confiscated her jewelry, all her small rings, and then placed her in a holding area.
I just remember being in her code and hearing the sound of the buzzers go off and the doors open and shutting, and I was scared.
Imarie and 5 others got to go home the day they were arrested. But 4 boys, 2 10-year-olds, an 11-year-old, and a 12-year-old, they were kept in jail overnight. 2 of them were held all weekend. One of the boys told me about how he was forced to shower in front of a guard and then given a jumpsuit and put in a cell alone, which was all standard procedure for kids put in detention in Rutherford County. During waking hours, the kids aren't allowed to sleep. I spoke to many people who told me that if if they did fall asleep, or if they were caught lying down, the guard would bang on the cell door to wake them up, or force them to stand in the corner of their cell for long periods of time. 10, 11, 12-year-olds are kids who play freeze tag at recess. They still snuggle on the couch with their parents and hold their hands when they get scared. In other words, these were kids. More about what happened once the rest of the county and the world got wind of the arrests after the break.
Running a business is hard work. Building your website shouldn't be. With Wix, you can express your ideas, give direction, then leave the heavy lifting to AI. From site creation to branded content and images. Have fun with the details. Customize what you want the way you want. And manage your whole business from a centralized dashboard with expert AI tools. Build, scale, and enjoy the incredible results. You can do it all yourself on Wix.
The New York Times app has all this stuff that you may not have seen.
The way the tabs are at the top with all of the different sections.
I can immediately navigate to something that matches what I'm feeling.
I go to games always.
Doing the mini, doing the Wordle.
I loved how much content it exposed me to. Things that I never would have thought to turn to a news app for.
This app is essential.
The New York Times app. All of the Times, all in one place. Download it now at nytimes.com/app.
By the time the last kid was booked into the juvenile detention center, the news about the arrests had gotten out. A bunch of little kids arrested, some at school, with handcuffs. People were pissed.
Outrage is spreading through one Tennessee community after 5 children were hauled out.
100 parents met at First Baptist Church in Murfreesboro over the weekend demanding answers.
Injustice to these kids, injustice to the family. I'm angry.
The shock spread beyond just Rutherford County. Stories about the arrests appeared in the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Daily Mail. Fueling the outrage, it turned out that the charge brought against the kids, criminal responsibility for conduct of another. It's not actually a charge. It's a little technical, but criminal responsibility is a legal theory, one that was misunderstood by both Officer Templeton, who launched the investigation, and the judicial commissioners who approved the charges. The cases against the kids were later all dismissed. Soon after the arrests, the chief of police called for a thorough investigation to get to the bottom of what happened. Of the 20 people interviewed, investigators spent the most time with Officer Templeton.
So what we'll do is I'll first start with having you start at the beginning, wherever you think the beginning's at.
Well, as my report says, on 4/13, 10 o'clock, a teacher showed me a video.
Officer Templeton declined to speak with me, but she spoke to internal affairs investigators for almost 7 hours. And in those interviews, she talked about what she saw when she first watched the video of the fight.
You know, the group's pushing these 2 little kids to assault this other child. It was the whole group, and they're basically all doing the same thing. At some point, someone could have went and got an adult. I'm not saying jump in and physically stop the fight, but they could have went and got an adult. No one did anything.
So you felt obligated to try and arrest as many of those kids as possible.
I did not feel obligated at that point to arrest anyone. I felt obligated to investigate it if the detective division wasn't going to.
Okay.
For much of this interview, the tone of Craig Snyder, the lead investigator, is what I describe as perplexed over how arrests this unusual could happen in the first place. But to Officer Templeton, she seems to think the arrests were all pretty straightforward. In her view, she was just doing her job.
There's an assault here. There's a victim here. Juvenile court is about rehabilitation. And I felt like I needed to do something to help these kids. If I can get them in front of the judge, maybe she can put some services in the home, parent out, whatever. It's about rehabilitation.
Did anybody at any point, any supervisor, did any of them at any point tell you
that it turns out the kids were arrested on a charge that doesn't even exist, and that she's probably definitely getting in trouble for this entire fiasco, which she later did, a 3-day suspension. But even still, Templeton tells the investigators,
And with reverse, taking away all of the knowledge that I've learned the last 6 weeks, I'm doing the same way I did.
this is one of the most striking things I came across in my reporting. The difference in perception between those on the outside of this juvenile system and those on the inside. To the general public, arresting a bunch of children and throwing them in jail for watching a fight seemed, among other things, way out of line. But to many insiders, like Officer Templeton or the sergeant who backed her up, the arrest made sense. Same for the judicial commissioners, even the juvenile judge. Her response to the arrests was, quote, "We are in a crisis with our children in Rutherford County. I've never seen it this bad." It's hard to change a system when the insiders running that system don't see a problem with it. But there definitely was a problem. In the years leading up to the arrests at Hopgood Elementary, Rutherford County's own data showed that it was jailing a staggering number of kids. The county had been warned about it, actually. Years before, a consultant had told county officials that they were jailing kids at more than 3 times the state average. Still, nothing changed. In fact, the numbers just kept going up, which meant for the kids of Rutherford County, getting sent to juvenile detention was almost a rite of passage, a normal part of childhood. In many cases, what it also was illegal. This is the story of how that system came to be, how it came to be built, and how it came to be accepted, lauded even. It's also the story of the 2 insiders, former juvenile delinquents themselves, who actually did see the problem in Rutherford County, what it was doing to kids. They just needed other people to see it too. That's next time on The Kids of Rutherford County. The Kids of Rutherford County is a co-production of Serial Productions, The New York Times, ProPublica, and Nashville Public Radio. It was reported by me, Maribel Knight, with additional reporting from Ken Armstrong. The show is produced by Daniel Guillemette, with additional production by Michelle Navarro. Editing from Julie Snyder and Jen Goyer, along with Sarah Bluestein and Ken Armstrong at ProPublica, and my colleague Tony Gonzalez at Nashville Public Radio. Additional editing from Anita Badajo and Alex Collins. The supervising producer for Serial Productions is Nday Chupri. Research and fact-checking by Ben Faber, with additional fact-checking by Naomi Sharp. Sound design, music supervision, and
subscribe to the New York Times, where you'll get access to all serial production shows and all the New York Times podcasts. And it's super easy. You can sign up through Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And if you're already a Times subscriber, just link your account and you're done.
In 2013, 3 years before the arrests at Hopkins Elementary, when a bunch of kids were arrested and brought to juvenile detention for not stopping a fight, a guy named Wes Clark had just graduated law school. Wes was 25 years old, smart, ambitious, but he was also just coming out of a pretty wild past. On and off since he was a teenager, he'd been addicted to OxyContin. A hopeless love of this shit, is how he puts it. With that came Wes's rap sheet, a DUI, some drug charges. So considering this, he knew the chances of getting a job at a Tony White shoe law firm were pretty close to zero. But he needed a job. That's when some lawyers he met in recovery circles gave him a tip. There's always work in juvenile court.
They were like, hey, this is a place you can go and at least start out and learn the ropes, because there was a need for lawyers to do that.
Court-appointed juvenile cases don't pay well, and lawyers have told me that juvenile court lacks the prestige of adult criminal court. One lawyer harshly described it as the bottom rung of legal practice. But for Wes,
You know, it was something to do, which was much better than nothing to do.
at the time, Wes was living in Rutherford County, Tennessee.
And so I just went down to the juvenile court and observed a couple of days, and then asked to, be put on the list to take appointments. And it was in January of 2014 that I got my first juvenile court appointment.
Wes's first case was for a girl who was being held in detention on a misdemeanor called reckless burning, a crime Wes had never heard of. The girl was accused of setting a small fire in a neighbor's barn. So police had picked her up the day before and taken her to juvie, where she spent the night in a cell waiting for her hearing. Wes went down to the detention center to meet with her.
I remember just like physically how small she was, like kind of struck me like, wow, this is a really little kid, you know?
The girl was 12, wearing the jail's standard issue jumpsuit. Wes was thrown.
I remember feeling like I am in a penal facility. I've visited prisons before, I'd been in jails before myself, and it was very much identical to an adult prison. And I'm sitting across from this little scared 12-year-old girl who had like accidentally started a fire and had now spent the night in jail. It just felt wrong, it did not feel like this is how kids should be treated. Didn't feel like this was the right place for this 12-year-old.
It turns out juvenile detention literally wasn't the right place for this 12-year-old to be. Because while misdemeanor offenses like reckless burning, shoplifting, trespassing are pretty common in juvenile court, what's less common is having a kid jailed for one. And while this was Wes's first case, and he didn't know much about being a defense lawyer, he did know that state crime was to read the laws. He looked up the criteria for reckless burning, and he also looked up Tennessee's detention statute, which laid out guidelines for when a kid can be locked up. Wes learned that a minor, like this 12-year-old girl, could only be held for very specific reasons, like if she was already on probation, or run away from another county, or if she caused a serious injury, none of which applied to her case. Reading this, Wes did a double take, like,
Wait a minute. Even if this kid did everything that is said here, they can't be detained according to the statute. Oh, this is gold, Bust this kid out of here. This is good research. Nobody's thought of this.
so a bit puffed up over his discovery, Wes went and talked to the prosecutor, and triumphantly cited the statute, telling her that by law, she can't hold his client in jail. But the prosecutor didn't have much of a reaction to this news. Instead, Wes says she asked him a few questions about his client's circumstances, and then basically was like, okay, yeah, sure, your client can go home. And later that day, the 12-year-old girl was released. Wes ended up having mixed feelings about this outcome. had gone to law school for a reason. He wanted to argue the law. He was also a brand new lawyer, still figuring out how this all worked. But from what he could see, Rutherford County was operating by its own rules. They had their own form of juvenile justice. And Wes was about to figure out who and what was behind it. From Serial Productions and the New York Times, I'm Maribel Knight. This is the kids of Rutherford County. Episode 2, What the Hell Are You People Doing?
Summer trips are around the corner. Start here and go anywhere with Hertz. You'll hit the road with fast pickups, easy returns, and a Gold Plus rewards program packed with perks. That weekend trip upstate? Take it. That drive to connect with family and friends? Let's go. Choose from premium cars, SUVs, trucks, vans, and more. With over 11,000 Hertz locations worldwide, what are you waiting for? Book your next road trip at Hertz.com.
Running a business is hard work. Building your website shouldn't be. With Wix, you can express your ideas, give direction, then leave the heavy lifting to AI. From site creation to branded content and images. Have fun with the details. Customize what you want the way you want. And manage your whole business from a centralized dashboard with expert AI tools. Build, scale, and enjoy the incredible results. You can do it all yourself on Wix.
From the beginning, Wes could see something wasn't right with Rutherford County's juvenile court. And after just a few months taking cases there, he was feeling pretty beaten down.
It was just disheartening. I mean, every single docket, there are kids who just simply don't meet the legal criteria to have been detained, even arrested, yet here they are, in chains, in a jumpsuit, having a detention hearing to determine whether they're going to continue to be detained. That had a pretty negative effect on me and about, like, well, gosh, what's my role here? Like, how good of a lawyer am I? I'm just kind of going along with this system.
What, did you ever talk to the other lawyers about, like, the person?
Yeah, I did, and
What were those conversations?
I mean, it would mostly be like complaining after a hearing and saying, "How can you believe this? Like, look right here, statute. Look what it says. This kid had a misdemeanor assault. There's no way this kid could be detained." And I don't remember ever really getting more than like, "Oh well, yeah. What are you gonna do?"
To Wes, it seemed obvious that this "what are you gonna do" attitude was because of one person, the judge, Donna Scott Davenport. Judge Davenport oversaw the entire juvenile justice system in Rutherford County, the court and the juvenile jail. The jail's director answered to her. And with no jury in juvenile court, she had the final say for every case that came before her. Wes says Judge Davenport set the tone on everything.
There was always a feudalistic feel to the courthouse. She was the seat of power, and there was that feel that we were all part of a community, and she made the rules of the community. That was just how it was.
Judge Davenport was the only juvenile judge the county ever had, first elected to the bench in 2000, when the county's juvenile court was established. A white woman with a commanding presence, often wearing her signature teal-colored robe, Judge Davenport had a banner hanging in the courthouse proclaiming her the county's favorite elected official, an award given out by the local paper. She was sometimes referred to as the mother of the county. She even referred to herself as the mother of the county at times. Judge Davenport declined to talk to me for my reporting, but in other interviews, she said she saw her work as a ministry more than a job. "I'm here on a mission," she said. "It's God's mission." She was strict when it came to enforcing the rules of the courtroom. No untucked shirts, no sundresses, no spaghetti straps. spandex, no body piercings, no uncovered tattoos. Pants must be pulled up at all times, and definitely no swearing. But to Wes, it wasn't just that Davenport was a tough judge. What bothered him was the courtroom dynamic, where the staff, and especially some of the lawyers, were less advocates for their clients and more supplicants to the judge.
Within the first few detention hearings that I attended, there was a lawyer who was arguing for his client not to be detained. And Judge Davenport was yelling about how much of a danger this kid who had been caught breaking into a car, how that this wasn't something we could tolerate in this community.
To be clear, breaking into a car did not meet Tennessee's criteria for juvenile detention.
And the lawyer gets up, and he's standing there in this suit that looks like it's been stuffed in the trunk of a car for weeks. You know, you can see the wrinkles on the back of it, on the sleeves. And he's got one of those beards that's not like an intentional beard, but just, you know, fuck it, I haven't shaved for a week kind of beards. And he's making this argument. But as he's saying words, he's looking down, like visibly submitting to the prosecutor and to the judge and saying, Judge, you can detain this kid and you know, he's subject to that, but just please don't. That was the essence of what he was saying, just grovel, begging without any reference to any rules that actually apply to the situation.
What are you thinking as you're watching this?
I don't want to be like that guy.
Wes tried to not be that guy, but it didn't get him very far.
So you're regularly going in front of Davenport and saying, you cannot detain these kids.
Yes.
How?
With the statute.
Like you're holding it?
Yes, I would print it out, and I would have it in my file, and I would read it, and I would say, this kid is not eligible to be detained, period. So you have to let him go.
So the first time you did that, it was like you didn't even say it.
Right.
Second time you do that.
It's like, I find this child's a threat to himself, to the community, and I'm going to hold him. And I'm like, that's not the analysis. Like, there have to be these prerequisite findings of, like, felony or prior convictions or kids on probation. And that would be like, I, you know, was just talking about nothing.
And then the third time. And the fourth time.
Yeah, I mean,
He said it would go on and on. The phrase that Wes's Davenport would cite in order to justify detention, finding a kid a threat to himself and the community, that phrase came up a lot. She would say it as if citing a legal rationale. But a kid being a threat can't be the only legal metric for jailing them. That's just not how the law is written. It seemed obvious to Wes that Davenport and the jail she oversaw were violating this detention statute. But he seemed to be the only one in the court who felt that way.
by the time I got there, which was 2014, like, it was just generally accepted. This is how the juvenile justice system operates.
To Wes, everyone was falling in line with how the judge did things. But this was Wes's perspective, and he was coming at it from the point of view of a defense lawyer, a very green one at that. So was Wes right? Was this follow the leader attitude really the culture here? I wanted to find out from someone with a different perspective. So I went to the court's longtime prosecutor, Leslie Cullum. She spent 16 years working in Davenport's courtroom. And just by demeanor, she's almost the total opposite of Wes. Where he's quick to be outraged, Leslie's much more deliberate, a careful observer of the court's politics.
It is my experience that officials, maybe especially judges, don't particularly like to be told they're wrong or how to do things.
See what I mean? Deliberate. Leslie remembers Wes was an antagonizing presence in the courtroom, both toward her and Judge Davenport. And she didn't think that was always the most effective approach. That said, Leslie herself didn't always like Davenport's approach. Like when Davenport would yell at child defendants and their families from the bench.
I think if a middle-aged lady yelling at you was going to solve your problem, you wouldn't be in court. Because I think most of the mothers would have done it.
Leslie told me she wanted to get families treatment, get them into programs, things like anger management, drug and alcohol counseling, which in her eyes didn't happen nearly enough in Davenport's court. I asked her if she ever saw what Wes did, kids being held in detention when they shouldn't have been.
I'm sure there were examples.
And did you feel like you could say anything?
Not really.
Was that a frustrating place to be in?
Yes, sometimes. But at the end of the day, it's her courtroom. And I need to make myself work within her rules as much as I can.
So back to Wes. He'd just started his legal career at the juvenile court, and he was already frustrated and demoralized. He was up against a judge who kept dismissing his argument about the detention statute, a prosecutor who seemed to follow her lead, and colleagues who accepted the status quo. But what could he do about it? He was only 25 years old and was still just learning the ropes of juvenile court. He knew he wasn't going to change things on his own. But then one day, hanging out in the smoker section in front of the courthouse, he found an ally. That's after the break.
This is Sarah Koenig, host of the Serial Podcast. If you're hooked on this show, and I'm guessing you are, then I'm hoping my job here is pretty easy. To get you to subscribe to the New York Times, so you can listen to the rest of it. My father was an ad man, who taught me the best ads are declarative, no puffery. So here goes. Serial shows are expertly reported and inventive. Nobody makes them like we make them. But Serial's great serials aside, when you subscribe, you get all the Times shows. The Daily, Ezra Klein, Wirecutter has a new podcast. My advice though, don't just get an audio subscription. Go big. Subscribe to the paper, all access, the whole Megillah. Serial is part of the Times, so technically I work at the Times, and honestly I'm kind of cheap, but I subscribe for the news, obviously, and the games, and the cooking, and the magazine, and Serial. I think of the Times as a staple. Even my kids, who are not budding journalists and who don't even really listen to Serial, they both ask me for Times subscriptions. All the cool kids are doing it. So please, sign up. You can do it through Spotify or Apple Podcasts, or if you're already a Times subscriber, sign in. It's worth it.
Summer trips are around the corner. Start here and go anywhere with Hertz. You'll hit the road with fast pickups, easy returns, and a Gold Plus rewards program packed with perks. That weekend trip upstate? Take it. That drive to connect with family and friends? Let's go. Choose from premium cars, SUVs, trucks, vans, and more. With over 11,000 Hertz locations worldwide, what are you waiting for? Book your next road trip at Hertz.com. Running a business is hard work. Building your website shouldn't be. With Wix, you can express your ideas, give direction, then leave the heavy lifting to AI. From site creation to branded content and images. Have fun with the details. Customize what you want the way you want. And manage your whole business from a centralized dashboard with expert AI tools. Build, scale, and enjoy the incredible results. You can do it all yourself on Wix.
By the time I met Wesley, I've been back in that court for 7 or 8 years, seeing the same stuff over and over and over again.
This is Mark Downton. When Wes first arrived at the court in 2014, Mark had been a juvenile attorney there on and off for almost 15 years, though he admits several of those years were a blur, in part because
I think I would show up to court still drunk from the night before. That would happen. You know, you drink till 2 a.m. At 8 a.m., you're probably still a little drunk, right?
just like Wes, Mark had come to the court with some baggage, a couple DUIs arrived in 2000, the same year Davenport became the juvenile judge. He'd left a few times over the years for better paying jobs, but he always lost them because of his drinking, and then found himself back in the juvenile court. Eventually, Mark got sober and started focusing more on his work. And then one day, he found himself sharing a smoke break with Wes outside the courthouse. They quickly hit it off over their shared history of addiction and their run-ins with the law, as kids and adults. Mainly, though, they bonded over their shared struggles defending kids in juvenile court. Like Wes, Mark also had a document he was always bringing up in the courtroom.
I bring up the Constitution, and it never won. I never won an argument talking about the Constitution in that courtroom. Wesley never won an argument talking about the detention statute.
So we kind of hit it off, and
Again, here's Wes.
complaining about how a lot of these really good legal arguments we were making were being ignored,
So it's like we're Don Quixote or whatever. We're fighting against phantoms, and we're doing it over and over and over again.
Pretty quickly, Wes told Mark his ambitions. He was tired of citing the actual law, failing to get a client out, and then everyone going back to business as usual, locking up more kids. He wanted to end this system. Mark remembers the main thing Wes wanted to do.
Boy, he wanted to sue that. He definitely wanted to sue Judge Don really early on because of that statute. But the whole idea about suing the juvenile court, it wasn't. I didn't think he was crazy. I just thought it was so hard to do, to find the right mechanism to get in because of all the immunities that a court has. So I was like, whatever, Wesley, it's just not gonna happen. There's no way to do it. There's just no way to do it. To sue this court.
For various reasons, courts, and especially judges, are pretty well insulated from lawsuits. Generally, you can't directly sue a judge because of something called absolute immunity. I'll spare you the details, but still, Wes was determined to find a way. So for the next 2 years, Mark and Wes had these pie-in-the-sky conversations about suing the court, until Wes finally got a case they both saw as an opportunity. In April of 2016, Wes got an email from the court about one of his clients, a kid named Quintarius Frazier. Quintarius was 15 years old, and he was being held in detention for aggravated robbery. In the email, detention staff wrote that Quintarius had been acting out in jail, flashing gang signs, rapping, hollering, and they'd been holding him for a few days in something called lockdown. Now they wanted the prosecutor, Leslie Cullen, to file a motion giving them the authority to keep Quintarius in lockdown indefinitely. Wes read this and immediately called Leslie.
I'm like, what the hell is lockdown? What are we talking about here? It's like, oh, well, it's this process. And she explained that, the kids, they put them in the cell 23 hours a day and let them out an hour a day. And I'm like that's solitary confinement. What are you talking about? I'm just indignant about the whole thing because I'm like, surely I'm missing something. Really, they're not putting kids in solitary confinement. Surely.
After getting off the phone with Leslie, Wes headed to the detention center and met with Quintarius.
And I'm like, hey buddy, what's going on back there? And he's like, well, I got in some trouble and they put me on lockdown. What's lockdown?
Quintarius told Wes he'd been placed on lockdown before. It was twice in the past few weeks, actually. Once for 8 days straight. The staff would take everything out of his cell, including his bedding and his mattress. During the day, he wasn't allowed to lay down, so he'd sit on the metal bunk. Quintarius told Wes that they covered up his window so he couldn't see out. All he was left with was just a Bible and a cup.
My jaw is dropping that this is happening, and that he's even sitting there composed and just it's not registering with him that this is some human rights violation that's occurring. It's just this is my life now, So I'm like, listen, man, this is insane. Okay, they can't do this to you. We're gonna put an end to this. This is some real next level bullshit, and it's not gonna fly.
dose of LSD, insulting an officer, and then getting into a fight with an inmate. Wes got thrown into solitary, and he remembers feeling like he was totally alone, and that anything could happen to him.
You know, your whole world shrinks down to this little concrete hole. And after that point, I found out that I may have rights on paper, but in practice, if I'm alone in a concrete hole under a courthouse and there's a bunch of, you know, angry law enforcement officers that are just irritated with me, I've got precisely as much liberty as they decide I have. And that was pretty scary.
So now, here Wes was, a decade later, a lawyer representing a kid who was going through almost the same thing he did, except his client, Quintarius, was going through it at the age of 15. Now, to be clear, lockdown was technically legal in Tennessee. The state's Department of Children's Services allowed it as a way to manage behavior, and juvenile detention centers could use it as much as they wanted, sometimes calling it isolation or seclusion. But to Wes, no matter what it was called, he thought it all amounted to the same thing: solitary confinement. And he thought for children in particular, it was cruel and inhumane. Leaving Quintarius in the detention center, Wes had just 2 hours to go before his hearing in front of Judge Davenport. So he sat down in the courthouse and pulled out his iPad, frantically looking for any legal justification to get Quintarius out of solitary. And he found plenty of material to support his argument. A recent executive order from President Obama had banned solitary confinement of children in federal facilities. A report from the UN qualified the practice as torture. And he also found some psychiatric articles that all said the same thing: solitary confinement is really bad for kids. Wes assembled his argument right up to the moment the hearing began in front of Judge Davenport.
So the judge's like, well, Mr. Clark, what do you have to say? And I start rattling off the statistics and the generally accepted definition of solitary confinement and how it's like torture for children. And I don't get too far into it before the judge kind of interrupts me to say, we don't put anybody in solitary confinement. And I'm like, hold up, didn't we just say you're going to put somebody in a room for 23 hours and then let them out for 1 hour a day? I'm looking around the room for like these other adults in the room, but like, what the hell are you people doing? This is a child, like you're adults, this is the legal system, and you're telling me you're putting this kid in a hole for 23 hours a day? I explained, well, this has just been outlawed in the federal system. President Obama, you know, issued an executive order prohibiting this practice, and this is exactly why. And then the judge like scoffed at that, you know, well, this is not President Obama's courtroom, this is my courtroom. And it was just the craziest feeling, because it's like holding a glass of water and yelling at people about what's in your hand, and they pretend like they don't see it, or they pretend like, you know, the reality that you are there observing with your own eyes is just not happening.
At the end of the hearing, Davenport issued her ruling, sending Quintarius back to lockdown. On the order, she scrawled the conditions: in cell 23 hours, 1 hour free time. If disrupts during free time, the 23 starts again. Signed, Donna Davenport. Wes had lost.
I walked out as angry as I've ever walked out of a courtroom in my life. My jaw is clenched. My hands are clenched around my briefcase. And I don't want to look at anybody. I don't want to speak to anybody, because I don't have anything but contempt for anyone that could just let that go on. I mean, it's bad to say, it's bad to feel, but I developed a real hatred for some of the people that were doing these things.
On his drive home from the courthouse, Wes called Mark.
Mark's like, holy shit, this is really something. And he too had read the Obama executive order, and we talk about how this could really be the basis for a law
filed a 28-page emergency complaint with the federal court, saying the juvenile jail had violated the 8th and 14th Amendments to the Constitution. In other words, what Rutherford County was doing to Quintarius was cruel and unusual punishment. Within hours of filing, the federal judge granted the lawyer's request, writing Quintarius was being subjected to, quote, inhumane conditions likely to cause him irreparable harm. The judge ordered Rutherford County to let Quintarius out of lockdown immediately. Legally speaking, the judge's decision was a narrow one. It only applied to Quintarius, but it was bigger than that too. For one, it set a precedent. Within a year, Tennessee had banned the practice as a form of punishment for kids in detention. But on top of that, for Wes, it was a personal victory. For 2 years, he'd been trying to get someone to see what he did, that Rutherford County wasn't following the rules. And now, at least for this one kid, he'd finally gotten someone with authority to listen. Meanwhile, the same week that Wes and Mark were dealing with the Quintarius case, news began blowing up about 11 local kids arrested for not stopping a fight. Kids as young as 12, 10, 8 years old, who were taken to the juvenile detention center, some even booked and held overnight. When Wes heard about the arrests, he didn't think much of it. In fact, it seemed pretty typical for Rutherford County. He even joked about it. What's the news here? But what he'd soon realize is that this little scandal, it would eventually provide the roadmap he and Mark had been looking for, and would reveal what was really happening inside this juvenile justice system. That's next time on The Kids of Rutherford County. The Kids of Rutherford County is a co-production of Serial Productions, The New York Times, ProPublica, and Nashville Public Radio. It was reported by me, Marvin Knight, with additional reporting from Ken Armstrong. The show is produced by Daniel Guimet, with additional production by Michelle Navarro, editing from Julie Snyder and Jen Guerra, along with Sarah Bluestein and Ken Armstrong at ProPublica, and my colleague Tony Gonzalez at Nashville Public Radio. Additional editing from Anita Badajo and Alex Kolowitz. The supervising producer for Serial Productions is Nde Chuglu. Research and fact-checking by Ben Phelan, with additional fact-checking by Naomi Shaw. Sound design, music supervision, and mixing by Phoebe Way. The original score for our show is from The Blasting Company. Susan Westling is our standards editor, and legal review from Dana Green, Alameen Sumar, and Simone Procas. The art for our show comes from Pablo Delcon. Additional production from Janelle Pfeiffer. Mac Miller is the executive assistant for Serial. Sam Dolnick is the deputy managing editor of the New York Times. At the New York Times, thanks to Elizabeth Davis Moore, Susan Beachy, Kitty Bennett, Alan de la Carriere, Sheila McNeil, and Kirsten Noyes. Special thanks to our session musicians,